Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Jason Segel, an Emmy Award nominee and the co-creator and star of Shrinking. That's still great. I think being called an Emmy nominee, even is still awesome. So that's got to be really
It's the
nice.
coolest, man. I didn't get nominated for anything until like these past couple of years, and so I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I love the show, and I think season two is just fantastic. I wanted to ask, going into season two, in terms of like the response to season one, I guess like and how people felt about the show. I guess how did that like inform like you guys in terms of where you could push the show or where you wanted to push the show and like what people I guess like liked about it or what you felt like the audience would be prepared for as you went into season two.
Well, it's interesting. Like you don't exactly know what a show is before you make it, and even the whole season one, while you're shooting it, like until you start seeing cuts, you don't even quite know what the show is. Because I've always found that editing is almost like the final stage of writing. You get
Hmm.
another crack at the tone. You get, you're actually meeting it in person, if that makes sense. It's like you've sort of been blind dating each other or like pen pals, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, there it is. Let's figure this thing out. And so I think that it's funny, like your question was framed about like the audience response to it. How did that inform us? I almost think part of it too is our own response to it.
Okay. Yeah.
How did it inform us? Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, those two are funny together. Oh, these combinations that you kind of like, they happened to be in a scene together because that's how you wrote it. And you're like, oh, but they were really weirdly funny together. We should give them a whole episode. That kind of stuff starts happening. Like you see
Mhm.
these odd couple pairings. I would say even the way we wrote Harrison totally evolved from when we first conceived the show because of the limits of our imagination. It's you sort of think as a writer, okay, what we'll do is we'll have me and Jessica be funny around Harrison and he'll be grumpy about it. Like that's how we wrote him at first. And then you get to episode, I think it was 6 of season 1, where there's that party that he shows up stoned at. And you're like, oh no, he can do moves. Like this guy is like doing Peter Sellers style comedy right now. So I guess it's that you get exposed to all the strengths of a cast like this and you start wanting to see more of what you weren't able to imagine going in.
This is an incredible cast. Like I feel like you said there, like I feel like every single person on the show could be like the lead of their own show,
Yes.
probably, right? It's like
Yes. I've
it's
said that exact same thing.
okay.
It's 100% true. I've literally said that same thing that you could have a spinoff of every single one of these characters. Um, I have not been a part of something, and this is with total respect. I've done a lot of amazing things, but I've been a part of a lot of amazing
Yeah,
things. You know,
yeah.
um, everybody really, really cares on this set. Everyone comes in to murder, and I think that like really shows. It's like when a sports team is really like firing, and you see that they've locked in, and you're like, oh, there's something egoless happening where Jaylen Brown doesn't care if Jason Tatum takes the last shot and vice versa. It's just they want to win. And
Hmm.
that's a little bit how I feel on our set. Like everyone's just psyched that a scene works.
Hmm.
And if that's Michael Yuri carrying it, who's a genius this season, or Ted McGinley, who emerges as like this unsung hero of the season, and Krista Miller is doing stuff that I don't think people have gotten to see her do. And it's really an honor to be a part of.
It's so great. You also brought in this season, obviously, Brett Goldstein, co-creator, and he plays Lewis, incredible character. Totally different, obviously, I think, from people who are familiar with him for Ted Lasso. It's a much different part. I love the scenes with you. I think like, as actors, I think you're both so great in those scenes this season. They're very, like the way they're sprinkled throughout the season. And especially, like, I forget, it's the episode where Jimmy, like, tells him to go fuck off, basically, right? And not come back. It's so
Yeah.
great. That scene I found that scene just incredible, especially like the way you play it, I thought was so great. The way you are playing Jimmy's like all these different emotions. It feels like it's happening contemporaneously, basically. I guess like
Oh, good.
can you talk about a little like working with him and I guess what his interpretation of the character maybe brought out in you and your interpretation of Jimmy's response to Lewis. I was wondering like how did that like how did how he played him impact how you played those scenes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, all these things you learn like in acting class that you don't quite understand what they mean. A lot of them turn out to be true. This like idea of acting is reacting and all this stuff. You're like, what are you talking about? I'm gonna do acting, not reacting. But then I have found with time that for me, my best strategy acting wise, um, is to know my shit really, really well. Like know it so well. I like to think of it as like you're planning a river rafting trip. And so you have pre-production for me, prep, whatever you call it, is just like intensely planning this trip. Like, you're not going to be able to be holding the map. So I'm going to memorize this map. I'm going to know it just right. And like, I'm going to have all my gear. And then acting is like you step into the river and all of a sudden the river's in charge. And these plans you have, you're like, they're really helpful, but all of a sudden Brett's doing something and my job is just to like be there for it. Is you know what I mean? Is
Mhm.
to be there for all these people doing their thing. Um, and that may be like part of the function of being like main guy is that you're like all these people are orbiting you and it's your job to like let them reflect off of you,
Hmm.
you know? Um, I think there have been other things where I'm playing a smaller part where your job is to really know exactly how you're going to come in and like you're like a pinch hitter. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your job is to hit a home run. My job is to like serve the ball. I'm sounding much more athletic than I actually am.
I love
I
this though. I'm way in. I'm like, great. Basketball metaphors, baseball metaphors. Let's go. That's
yeah.
like it's perfect.
They're just things I've heard other men talk about.
Very masculine. It feels very right.
Uh,
I love obviously that Jimmy and Alice relationship is also so complex in this season. And then I think the episode that just aired this week, we end with the car with Jimmy buying the car for Alice's birthday, and then like her finding out that like he told Lewis
yeah.
that whole thing. I love. I think Lupita is amazing in the season. I love her as an actress. She's so great. I find it also interesting that Jimmy is a young, like he's like a young, like we're relatively the same age, and I'm always watching the show. I'm fascinated. It's like having a high school child. I think is like really interesting to for this age, and I guess like I because I
Don't
don't
even
really
get
they don't really
started.
show that on TV very much, right? So I was just like, oh, that's interesting. I guess can
Yo,
we talk a little
man.
about
Yo,
that
man.
relationship?
Let me
Yeah.
tell you something. You're going through the same thing I went through, but you're asking the question like how I tried to cling on to it, where you're like, oh, young dad. These are real young dads. We're not that young anymore, man. We're normal age dads.
Well, I'm yes. I mean, I am a
It's
dad, but not
breaking
in
my
high school.
heart.
It's
There was
true
a
though.
moment, yeah, there was a moment when I was doing winning time where I was coaching these guys, and in my head, these are my contemporaries. That's how I picture it, like my fellow young actors. And then there was a pause in between shooting, and they all kind of like talked to each other for a minute. And then one of them kind of stepped forward and was like, Mr. Segel, we've been talking. Do you have any advice for us young guys? And at that point, I realized things are different now. But yeah, it is interesting. She's I guess my character, if he's my age, is 44. She's playing 17 or 18, so it would have been like, late 20s he had her. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that also speaks to some of the ways that he is kind of adolescent in his parenting. You know,
Yeah.
Jimmy is very like the thing that we're really playing with Alice and Jimmy is this dynamic of who is parenting who at any given moment. And it's very complicated and it keeps switching between those two. And I do think a big journey of the series, not just the season, will be that ending at the right size.
Right.
You know what I mean? Is like that dynamic getting right. I have always, amidst all of the stuff going on, in my head, this is a show about a guy and his daughter.
Right. Okay.
It's like everything else super important, But in terms of his true north, as I'm not a parent, but as I imagine it would be with any parent, is he would step away from all of it for Alice.
Right. And I think that comes through, and that's like you said, like that's like the heart of the show, really, is that relationship. And we have to buy into that as viewers, and I think we do because of you guys and like the way the characters are written too. It's just really good. You have in this episode, you also have Cobie Smulders shows up, right? How I Met Your Mother reunion, which is really cool. I know people were very excited about that. I guess one of the things I really liked about it is I don't again, great show. I loved How I Met Your Mother. No, but I don't recall you guys ever getting any kind of scene like that together. And I just loved, I was like, wow, this is a totally different dynamic. And it was so much fun to watch. I imagine it was really fun for you guys to do. But I guess like, how did you, like, did that surprise you? I guess like getting to like do those, I mean, it's the show went off the air, I think 10 years ago, right? That was the finale. So it's been a long time for both of you as actors. But I guess like getting to come back and play such a different dynamic, I'd imagine was like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. And I think like what makes good acting, maybe there's something like going on under there, I don't know. But for me, there is something really special. Like, look, we spent formative years together, that entire cast. Like, I was
Right.
24 when I started the show and 33 when it ended. This is like when you're becoming who you are
Yeah.
and also being a mess and getting things right and getting them wrong. And like, we did all of that in front of each other.
Hmm.
And I think that there was something about that scene. If there's like something like electric about the dynamic there, it's two people looking at each other 10 years later, being like, look at us now. Like, look at what you've been through, look at what I've been through, and here we are still standing, doing acting with each other. And I think there was like a built-in intimacy to the way those characters like looked at each other.
Right. Did you like, was she, I guess like how, were you like when you guys were writing this season, like kind of figuring it out, was she like, were you like, oh, that would be great for her? Or like, how'd you kind of end up like with her in that part, I guess?
We wrote the part and then we were like, who do we put in this? And I said, what about Kobe?
Okay.
And everyone was like, yeah, that's a great idea. It turns out to be like a pretty small world and everybody kind of knows everybody one way or another. And um, yeah, so it was actually pretty easy. This was a phone call.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned before Harrison, obviously, like having how funny he is and like how not underestimating him, I guess that would be the wrong word, but like, like you were saying, like how you were limited in the thinking of what he
Not
could do,
limiting
I
him,
guess.
yeah.
Right. And I guess the other thing I was thinking too is like, as an actor and with him in scenes, obviously, I'd imagine the first season, and I'm sure, I think you've talked about this, like you're filming scenes opposite like Han Solo, right? And Indiana Jones. So you got to be like, wow, that's pretty crazy. But now you've had like several episodes with him, obviously, in like 2 years of show or whatever, how many years here. Now we're talking since the first season was a couple years ago. Anyway, I guess like, yeah, like how has that changed for you in terms of like working with him as an actor, and like what have you noticed about him getting to work with him for so long? Because I mean, like not a lot of people, I would say, have had the luxury of working with Harrison Ford in this like long of a timeline, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I actually never thought of what you just said. You're right.
Right, right, because it's like,
Yeah. Yeah. I guess people involved in any of the sequel stuff, maybe, but like, yeah, what an honor. I think, well, Harrison does something like right at the beginning of working with him, which I think is like really generous, is he intentionally kind of breaks through any reverence that you might have. He wants to be part of the group. And so very quickly you're like, this is my teammate. Um, I don't want to speak for Harrison. I want to speak for his relationship to this job, but what I have gathered is that it is very inspiring to be in a situation where everybody really fucking cares.
hmm, okay,
And I think that that's also increasingly rare, especially as like budgets inflate and things become about different criteria. Like Harrison doesn't have to work anymore.
yeah.
I think I'm just speaking out of school,
No, I don't think so either. Yeah.
you know? And so I think that why is a really good question. And it's because you love it and you care and like maybe being around an energy that is why you do this in the first place is like a pretty cool thing, maybe.
Yeah. The other thing I love about this season too, just a general structure thing, adding the extra 2 episodes, I thought was like really great too. And again, like I just like I don't know, I thought that like makes the show even breathe even more and kind of reminded me of this what you were saying just there about like the way budgets and stuff are different now. You don't really see that a lot with the streaming shows, but getting that extra time I think was really helpful. I would imagine for you guys too, right? Like
It
for the
was
performances
great,
and everything. Yeah.
especially with a cat, like we were saying before, especially
Yeah.
with a cast like this, it gave room for all of a sudden everyone to have an arc,
Right.
you know, and everyone deserves one. Like it, it's cool.
What would you say? I guess I know you don't want to spoil what's coming ahead and stuff, but obviously the show is coming back for a third season. What are you excited about exploring further in the third season, let's say?
Yeah. Well, we've given like a word that's a true north for each season. And season one was grief, season two was forgiveness, and season three we're calling moving forward. And
Okay.
so it's fine to say that.
Yeah.
So, what is the next stage of trying to get through when when the worst thing happens to you? What do you do? And
Right.
so the next part is like trying to get your life back together.
That's great. And I guess last thing, I think the finale is on Christmas Day, if I
Yeah, how
recall.
about that?
Pretty cool. I want to ask you this. What's your favorite? What is your what is your favorite Christmas movie? I was just thinking this. I was like, what the hell? What?
Oh yeah, that's easy. So it's a Wonderful Life. We used to watch every Christmas as a family,
Okay.
and uh, it's actually this is actually like I have a more interesting answer than I expected. Um, there are a lot of different acting styles. You
Mhm.
know, there's like some actors' thing is like they're like aspirational. Like a James Bond or a George Clooney, where you're like, oh, that guy is like the idealized what I would hope to be. And then there are guys like Jimmy Stewart, Tom Hanks, Kermit the Frog, who are like surrogates. They're like, oh, that's me. They get a little wrong and
Yeah.
they're a little and I do think that watching It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas probably influenced the kind of actor I wanted to be.
Oh, that's awesome. I could see that actually now that you're mentioning
Yeah.
it because I think of like like that is that is there's an earnestness to your performances usually that I think like attracts that. So I think that's really
Oh,
cool.
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I'm willing to not be that cool.
Yeah. And that makes it cool though. I think that's
Yeah, yeah.
it works in its reverse. Jason Segel, I know we have to wrap up. Shrinking, you can watch the episodes on Apple TV Plus. Thank you for doing this. This is
Hey
great.
man, thanks a lot. It was really nice talking to you.